Hi, my name is Lee Asher, and my whole life has been about playing cards and magic. As some of you may know, my father, Mark Horowitz, is a magician. Dad is the one who taught me my first card trick when I was 7. I went on to study casino management at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, though I've chosen a career in card magic. And now I'm the president of the world's largest playing card collectors association. So you can say that playing cards are a real passion of mine. A little more than a decade ago, something remarkable happened that forced me to examine my relationship with playing cards. I was blessed to spend time with two of the world's most renowned card historians, Tom and Judy Dawson, a husband and wife duo who wrote the book on card collecting. And it turns out, I didn't know much about playing cards. And unexpectedly, these two experts opened my eyes to an entire side of cards virtually unknown to me as a magician, and perhaps unbeknownst to you too. Now, a few months ago, I did something crazy to prepare for this lecture. That's not me, by the way. I made a huge timeline of different card magic and playing card history. We're talking hundreds of citations from various books, magazines, patents, and other texts. Today, I'm showing you what some of the research says and why this matters to us as magicians. You're about to see that as our tools get more refined over time, so does our card magic. It's also important to emphasize that all of the playing card innovation discussed today was driven by people playing various card games and the card makers attempting to improve that experience, not magic. We as card magicians were not the driving force behind breakthroughs of the past, but we benefited enormously, as you're about to discover. So take out a deck if possible, play with them while we talk, and ideally by the time we finish here, you'll enjoy and appreciate your cards even more. But first, people always ask, where does it all start? That's a tricky question to answer. Some historians say playing cards date back to ancient Egypt as early precursors to the tarot. Other scholars believe playing cards came from China. Now, chasing card magic origins? That's even harder. Unless you're Ed Marlowe. No, I kid. And while all of this is super interesting, today's talk isn't about the tarot or where playing cards started. Instead, it's about how we, as magicians, benefited from playing cards' various improvements. So, let's go back in time, long before everything was Marlowe's, and examine what cards and sleight of hand were like centuries ago. Take a look at these various cards starting from the 1300s. These are Mamluk playing cards of Turkic origins. They're hand-painted in gold and other fine materials and look way, way different than the cards we use today. And obviously, well, no museum in their right mind would let me touch these cards. My guess is they'd probably handle differently than modern cards too. By the way, every so often, glance at the deck you're holding and think about how far playing cards have come. Now, look back at the cards on the screen here and you'll see these playing cards are from the Netherlands. Notice the divergence of size and shape from the Mamluk cards. Also, this is tough to see, but interestingly enough, these cards had some sort of glaze applied to them. Now, perhaps it was a way to keep the paper from deteriorating quickly. Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. These cards are from Italy. Think about how Italian magicians perform with playing cards like the ones you're seeing. And by the way, the earliest card trick in print that we can find so far is Italian in origin. Pretty cool. These cards are from France, and they're starting to look a little closer to today's cards. And that's because we still use French suits and similar courts. But more than artwork, pay attention to the physical differences of all the cards you're seeing. These are from Germany. If you look closely at the card on the right, you'll see both square and rounded corners on the same card. And that's interesting because they didn't originally come this way. So that offers us some insight into the quality of playing cards from the past. These German-made cards most likely started off square-cornered. But over time, and with lots of use, the corners wore away. Think about that. Has that ever happened to any of the decks that you own? Probably not, because playing cards have come a long way. Next up are British-made playing cards. Even on the screen, you can see they look fibrous and rough. Again, imagine how magicians from the past use cards like these to entertain their audiences. Now, up until a couple hundred years ago, playing cards were either handmade or pressed, then completed by hand. It was a time-consuming and tedious process. Because time is money, producing cards were costly. And if they were expensive to make, well, you can bet they were not cheap to own. One more. This is a Spanish-made deck. From looking at all of these cards, you can see that no deck was exactly the same. Square corners, unevenly sized cards, possibly rough-feeling fibrous paper, and if the cards did have some sort of glaze coating to protect the paper, how quickly did it wear away? My point is that sleight of hand may have been challenging due to all of these obstacles and inconsistencies with playing cards from the past. So what kind of sleight of hand was being used back then? Let's jump to 1584 and quickly talk about famous amateur magician Reginald Scott. In his book, The Discovery of Witchcraft, we find a handful of card tricks in the juggling with cards section. In the routine, how to deliver out 4 aces and convert them to 4 knaves, we see a description of a technique we now refer to as the glide. In Scott's case, he would display a card on the bottom of a packet and go to place it on the table, but using some speech and the edge of the table to hide the action, he instead would lay down another card. Now, I want you to imagine that it's 1584 and you're standing outside in the public square. It's daytime and the air is humid and muggy. You're surrounded at your table, performing card tricks for townsfolk using a deck of handmade, unevenly sized, unfinished paper cards. Then, you draw everyone's attention by loudly stating that you're gonna magish for them, all while switching cards with a basic glide. I bet even in your imagination, you hear 2 coarse pieces of paper scraping against each other during the switch. I know I can hear it in mine, but seriously, if you think about it, the glide hasn't changed all that much over time. But with modern cards, it has certainly become easier. And we're going to break down some of the underlying improvements that have made certain moves less strenuous for us. For the time being, realize that as printing technologies advanced, cards were less expensive to produce, making them more affordable to own, all while becoming more consistent in performance. And this is a fantastic recipe for the growth of card magic. But before leaving this early era, let's quickly talk about one more excellent example of sleight of hand used back then. In Richard Neve's book, The Merry Companion, 1716, he has a routine titled, "To seem to change the top card of the pack into another." Now, instead of using a glide to switch the card like Scott, Neve describes a technique where you take off the 2 upmost cards very artificially, keeping them level at the side and ends, and as close together as may be, so as they may seem but one card. That's the double lift, friends. And even in Neve's time, playing cards were most likely inconsistent on the best of days. Now factor in humidity, condition of the deck, performance stress, and the idea of keeping 2 unevenly made cards together as one with any precision was perhaps easier said than done. Plus, remember, cards weren't as cheap or as accessible back then as they are today. So getting a new deck for every performance was probably out of the question. Now, like the glide, the double lift hasn't changed much over time either, but holding 2 cards together as one has become substantially easier and more precise. So much so that magicians have developed numerous versions and refinements for the double lift. The common thread here is that as printing technologies progress, cards become more consistent to use. So let's jump forward to the period between the 18 and the 1900s, when we see printing technology take a considerable leap forward. And these are the kinds of advancements that bring us into the modern era. And that makes sense, given it coincides with the second industrial revolution happening in Europe and America. It's also where we can identify specific playing card innovations that affect our glides, double ifs, and a whole bunch more. When steam-powered machines supplanted specific manual jobs, everything changed. Here's an oversimplified example to illustrate what I mean. Playing cards are printed on what looks like one piece of paper, but actually, it's made of two pieces of pasteboard glued and pressed together to form a single sheet. It all happens before any graphics, finishing, ink, glaze, coating go on the paper, and obviously everything has to be perfectly aligned. But before the 1800s, the sizing and gluing were done entirely by hand. And you can appreciate how unevenly glued cards may affect the quality of your card magic. So in 1842, when an American named David H. Gilbert patented a machine automating the entire sizing and gluing process for playing cards, that represented a considerable step toward uniformity. Speaking about things being uniform, up until the 1800s, playing cards were pretty much square-cornered. It is not easy trying to manipulate cards with this feature. I'm sure we've all treated a stack of business cards as if they were playing cards. For me, it always felt awkward and less manageable than handling a regular pack. And a big part of that gets attributed to those sharp, square corners. As it turns out, humble modifications like rounding corners became among the most significant improvements over the last few centuries. And we can thank American playing card maker Samuel Hart for this. Samuel Hart receives credit for popularizing the idea when he makes a bold choice to move away from the square aspect as early as 1859. Hart understood the simple fact that rounding the corners just makes cards easier to handle, and his customers wholeheartedly agreed. So much so, other makers quickly switched over, and by the early 1870s, about all playing cards in America were no longer square-cornered, other than the ones used for games like Faro. Eventually, other parts of the world adopted the concept too. Remember, playing cards were not perfect after these developments. That still took some time, but we can say all these different innovations represent a significant move toward uniform production and pave the way for how we print playing cards today. This next automation does get us closer to perfection. Keep in mind that up until the 1800s, cards were cut with paper trimmers. Have you ever tried to cleave something with a trimmer? And the tiniest movement of the paper or blade results in unevenness. Now consider this in terms of playing cards and how perfectly everything must be aligned. Sleight-of-hand wise, it seems misshapen and unevenly sized cards would have made performance life taxing. But steam-driven automation changes this too. There's a great story about how American makers stopped cutting their playing cards. In the 1880s, a young man named Samuel J. Murray worked as a machinist for a card company named Russell Morgan. Now, during his time there, Murray invented and patented machines to improve the playing card manufacturing process. Being the brilliant mechanical mind he was, Samuel Murray is the one who created an automated piece of machinery that, instead of cutting cards, punches them out from sheets of cardstock. That way, every single card is precisely the same size. And this guy was a genius. Now, for whatever reason, Murray abruptly leaves Russell Morgan and opens his own card business called National Card and positions himself to rival his old employer directly. And Murray's new method for making great cards in mass, mixed with his business prowess, was pretty effective. And what I'd like to call sweet, sweet revenge for Samuel Murray. His old bosses eventually bought him out, paid him a considerable sum of money to come back to work for them, and continued incorporating his patented machines and playing card making processes into producing their playing cards. Now, interestingly enough, for those of you who don't know, when Russell Morgan bought out Murray's company and a handful of other independent card manufacturers of that time, they became the largest playing card maker in all of America. And this is a significant moment in playing card history. And we'll come back to this in a bit. But for now, let's quickly give Samuel Murray's punch innovation a hand in assisting us to align our double ifs and square our decks with machine-like precision. Now, some of you may be asking yourself, what about the paper and the glaze coating you keep mentioning? Doesn't all of that help with sleight of hand too? Absolutely. And trying to pinpoint the start of applying lacquer or enamel coating to paper, then pressing said paper to a perfect thickness, might prove unlikely. By the way, that pressing is known as finishing, and it's during this finishing process that the maker may choose to impart texture to the paper. In most cases, that's what gives playing cards their tactility. Now please, don't confuse the finishing process with the glaze coating process. When people hear the word finish, they automatically think plastic coating. But the plastic coating is the glaze. The hatch patterns pressed into the paper is the finish. Now, regardless of who invented what, someone cleverly realized consistent paper thickness, textured patterns, and coated surfaces produce distinctive sliding properties when rubbed together. So throughout the 18 and the 1900s, we see makers worldwide experiment with different substances and finishing methods to achieve perfect feeling playing cards. Now, here's something most people don't know. Back then, in the manufacturer's minds, one of the ideal textures for playing cards resembled cloth. Interestingly enough, various paper finishes are meant to mimic the textured weave patterns found in fabric. I'll give you an example. This is for everyone in the room who has a B deck. Look at the box. Do you see the name of the finish? It says cambric, right? When New York Consolidated Card Company originally formulated this finishing method for their paper, it directly referred to a plain woven cloth with the same name. Cambric finish cards were meant to mimic the texture of cambric cloth. Yeah, let's find another example. Who's got some tally-hos in the room? Do you see the name of the finish on the box? It says linoid, right? Linoid is referencing the word linen. Again, the original tally-ho cards were meant to mimic the texture of linen cloth. The card companies during the 19th century that created bee and tally-ho playing cards were highly successful and mechanically applying various chemical substances, then finishing the paper to create different popular fabric textures. This gave their decks a consistent, distinctive feel that our card magic predecessors adored, appreciated, and romanticized. As a side note, today's reality is that linoid and cambric are remnants from the past, only to appear in the name. Nowadays, finishes like air cushion still get mechanically pressed into the paper, but those glazes which were once toxic are now made of vegetable starch-based adhesives and water-based coatings. Times change, but intentions stay the same. So let's remain in the same period between the 18 to 1900s, but leave the realm of automation. There's one more advancement worth mentioning that, unlike the others, was more art-based than machine-driven. And performing without this particular innovation may have been exhausting. Let me introduce you to the guy who changed our card conjuring lives forever. You've probably never heard his name, and he's virtually unknown in the magic world, but he's a superstar in playing card history. Cyrus Wellington Salady, an eccentric American inventor, changed how we view, play, and perform with cards. Salady did not have magicians in mind when creating his idea. Rather, his goal was to defend ordinary card players from cheaters. So in 1864, Cyrus Salady devised little symbols consisting of a suit and a value placed in the corner. This way, you can barely spread your cards, but still easily read them. And it cleverly stopped you from exposing your hand to prying eyes. And Salady's concept would become what we refer to as corner indices. Now, take a moment to think about performing card magic without corner indices. Seriously, don't laugh. For instance, without corner indices, we'd have to say goodbye to the bulk of our card peaks we use today. It also appears that a lack of corner indices would have made card magic just plain difficult for everyone, even with corner indices. Let me say that again. Even with corner indices, spectators still forget their cards. Now consider how hard it was to get your audience to remember that king of clubs without any extra help. I'm already exhausted. But in all fairness, Saladin's idea does significantly aid card magic by making the identification of values and suits quicker to recognize and easier to remember. And card magic would never be the same again. Now, as we see from the 18 to the 1900s, printing methods are evolving and cards are becoming more consistent, thus making them easier to perform with. And an example of a magician who benefited from some of this innovation, not all, but some, was a performer we've crowned the father of modern card magic, Johann Nepomuk Hofzinser. This Viennese magician entertained people in his salon with his card tricks by the 1850s. Perhaps, he's the father of modern card magic because cards were becoming modern. Of course, he was brilliant, and I'm not taking anything away from him. Instead, I'm giving credit to the cards being more industrialized than, let's say, the ones Scott or Nev performed with. Volume 2 of Magic Christian's excellent book, Non Plus Ultra, offers us insight into the Hofzinser's thoughts about playing cards. He believed, quote, good cards were lacquered and had a glossy surface, end quote. Magic Christian goes on to say that Hofzinser placed great value in the quality of his playing cards. As it happens, all the card peeps in this room know Hofzinser for his spread call. This technique allows you to control any card at any position in the deck by sliding cards out from one spot, sliding them back into another. Think about it. Performing a cull with rough, unfinished, unglazed, fibrous paper cards would have been problematic. And while we can't ask them, did magicians like Nev or Scott get to perform with glossy lacquered cards? We can only speculate, but probably not. However, we know for a fact Hofzinser did, and it appears he took full advantage of these luxurious properties. Now, Hofzinser was afforded another advantage over card magicians from centuries prior. He had a choice. A handful of card makers operated in Vienna during his time. Now, back in the 15 or 1600s, let's say, a selection of decks by multiple makers would have been improbable. But for Hofzinser and those in his period, and even us today, we're privileged to have a choice of decks to satisfy our individual needs. And while he probably wasn't the first magician to collaborate closely with card manufacturers, Hofzinser did have a working relationship with some local playing card makers. They were the ones making some of his gaffes. Once more, Magic Christian offers insight into the manufacturers Hofzinser preferred. Hofzinser ordered his special cards from the well-known company Anton Moser. Later, this company was bought out by Mr. Johann Georg Steiger, and word on the street, as Ottokar Fischer tells us this, that Steiger was Hofzinser's favorite due to his patience in making the cards. And after Steiger's death, it was taken over by the company Tietz and Schinke, which ended up today as the well-known Piatnik. Now here's something interesting. Piatnik, as some of you may know, is currently in business producing playing cards. And it's pretty cool that we magicians can still purchase high-quality decks from the company that once had roots in supplying our beloved Hofzinser. Please, keep in mind that Hofzinser was one of many card magicians during this period to reap the benefits of playing cards innovations. But more than bettering sleight-of-hand moves, the 18 to the 1900s also usher in the rise of playing card manipulation acts around the world. Cards were high quality enough now. The days where you could stand on stage, amazing your audience by fanning, springing, spreading, scaling, and back-palming cards, had arrived. World-famous magicians like the Herman brothers, Heller, Elliot, Thurston, Keller, and more embraced performing acts with cards. And before he was famous for escaping shackles, even Houdini booked himself as the king of cards. Now here's something cool. According to his brother Theodore, Houdini liked steamboat playing cards and would scale ones with his picture into the audience. Now undoubtedly, manipulation becomes a significant breakthrough for the genre of card magic. Plus, all this increase in popularity would set the stage, no pun intended, for the next century of card manipulators who would dub themselves flourishers and cardists. And as I sifted through all the research, All I could think to myself was, would any of this have manifested without higher grade playing cards becoming fashionable? I mean, it seems like modern card manipulation is a genuine case of right place, right time. Now, something else I noticed while compiling all of this research from the 18 to 1900s is, like Hofzinser, it seems magicians have always loved good playing cards and bragged about it. This certainly happened before the 1800s, but it starts happening more as we gain access to a larger selection of decks and as more magicians print their ideas. In his book Modern Magic, Professor Hoffman prefers British-made De La Rue playing cards. In Fools of Fortune, John Philip Quinn says he likes Samuel Hart square corner Pharaoh cards. And in John Neville Maskelyne's book, Sharps and Flats, he shows us beautiful pictures of tally-hos, steamboat playing cards, and where to mark angel-back squeezers. Now, I could keep going, but at a certain point, a lot of these different beloved brands get bought up by one shrewd playing card manufacturer near the end of the 1800s. You remember how I mentioned Russell Morgan & Co. bought almost all American card manufacturers the last 2 decades of the 19th century, making them the largest card producers in the United States, and how this was significant? It was. So let's talk about it and its impact on the field of card magic. To make a long story short, Russell Morgan & Co. went on a buying spree. They were on a mission to gain control of other factories, iconic brands, proprietary printing methods, and most importantly, dominate the American playing card market. And they did, all of it. By 1894, when Russell Morgan & Company bought out Samuel Murray and all the other independent card manufacturers of that time, they also changed their name to the United States Playing Card Company. Yeah, and here it comes. By 1899, United States Playing Card Company cemented its dominance by building the most extensive modern factory anyone had ever seen. I'm talking about the famed Norwood factory in Cincinnati, Ohio. Under the roof of this particular building sat new cutting-edge technology that would, in turn, produce some of the most desirable playing cards to perform with in the world. By the end of 1901, this factory was churning out modern playing cards and did so over the next century. So, what happens to card magic over 100 years when a major manufacturer buys up most other card factories, then builds a super factory with all the latest high-tech equipment to print the best possible quality playing cards? Well, we see a card magic renaissance in the 1900s. That's what happens. I want to stress that card magic has continually evolved and spread rapidly around the globe. What happens in the 20th century is no exception. And remember, playing cards are as good as they have ever been. And as a result, the 1900s are host to some of the most well-known card handlers of the modern era. There are so many people worth mentioning, it would take up all of my allotted time given today. So instead, let me share a few highlights with you about those who lived and operated during this Renaissance. And I'd be remiss not to begin with Erdnase. He published Expert at the Card Table in 1902 and spawned an entire school of card magicians, including Di Vernon, Johnny Thompson, and many others. And by the way, if you're wondering, Erdnase used B cards. We glean this information from figure 101 in his routine, the 3 aces. You can see the word B on the ace of spades. Perhaps Erdnase appreciated that cambric cloth texture too. Erdnase was just the start. In the early 1900s, magicians like Thurston, Stanion, Downs, and Dr. Hooker, he's the guy with the magnificent card rise, who used tally-ho decks, by the way, were creating names for themselves with playing cards and close-up magic. Also, remember, manipulating playing cards was all the rage too. During this period, Ferrelli, Hugard, and Ireland all began publishing books on card manipulation. And the most famous example of a card manipulator during this time was magician Richard Valentine Pitchford, better known as Cardini. If you're wondering what kind of playing cards Cardini used, that's a great story. His favorites were printed by the United States Playing Card Company and produced by the Chicago pharmacy Walgreens. These wonderful, colorful decks that he appreciated were named after Mrs. Walgreens' cute dog, Podo. Quote, realizing their potential for color-changing fans, Cardini reached an agreement with the Walgreens Company and bought up all their Podo packs with the exclusive rights to use them. End quote. Now, rumor has it that Cardini paid a considerable sum of money to the Chicago pharmacy to make all of that happen. Talking about Chicago, we have to mention the man, myth, and legend, Mr. Malkovsky, or, as he's affectionately known by all of us, Ed Marlowe. He'd become one of the most prolific card sleight-of-hand creators of the 20th century. And trust me when I say, it seems like this guy created everything. Well, at least everything I've thought of. His exhaustive examination of card magic methodology continues to spawn generations of students following in his footsteps. And Marlowe wasn't alone. Other notable card magicians of this period we still study today include Max Malini, Arthur Finley, Di Vernon, Charlie Miller, Francis Carlyle, Tenkai, Harry Lorraine, John Scarney, Ross Bertram, Slidini, Paula Paul, Theodore Anneman, Alex Elmsley, Roy Walton, Arturio Ascanio, Larry Jennings, Jimmy Grippo, Brother John Hammond, Renee Lavon, Derek Dingle, Ricky J, Juan Tamarez, Paul Harris, David Williamson, Alan Ackerman, Daryl Martinez, Bill Malone, Steve Forty, and so many more. I mean, I could keep going and going. With this many brilliant card handlers in the 20th century benefiting from modern playing cards, card magic would evolve and transcend the classic ideals and achievements of our magical ancestors. And here's something completely unanticipated. We observe a fascinating trend during the 20th century, most notably with gaff decks, where a magician makes a considerable living selling them to other magicians and the public. Well, card gaffs have been documented as far back as the 1600s, probably even earlier. In the 1900s, Theodore Deland sets the tone for the century. Quote, from about 1907 through 1915, Deland came up with 60 magical routines, nearly all of them involving trick cards. End quote. Now, of course, magicians supported his business, but his primary market eventually became lay people interested in the allure of a marked pack. Quote, surpassing all of his other magical originations, the marked cards produced by Theodore Deland have perpetuated his fame as the inventor of the impossible. End quote. Inventor of the impossible indeed. Listen to this. It turns out that his famous automatic magic dollar deck was sold by the thousands during that period. And that was over a century ago. And the deck is still available for purchase today. So you could definitely add a few zeros to the total number of Deland decks sold. Another gaff producer we should examine is a magician from Ohio named John Snyder Jr. If you've never heard of him, at one point, he was recognized as one of the foremost cardmen of America. He also owned a studio near United States Playing Card Company's Norwood factory. So in 1930, United States Playing Card Company and John Snyder Jr. make a deal, quote, with the express intent of permitting him to manufacture high-quality magic apparatus, end quote, meaning gaff cards and gaff decks. It's reported that John Snyder Jr. also spent a considerable sum of money to make all this happen, and he would name this new venture after the summer retreat that was near and dear to his heart. Fox Lake Playing Cards. Yeah, Snyder would go on to sell gaffs and gaff decks to magicians for the next 15 years. And upon his death, Ronald and Betty Haynes took over the business and renamed the studio the Haynes House of Cards. And while the Haynes family is no longer involved, Haynes House of Cards is still in business. Now think about how many gaff decks this operation sold over the years. Please, do not misinterpret my curiosity for the number of gaff decks sold. It's not so much about the money, as it is the idea that gaff decks are recognized as a potent tool for attracting newcomers to the art of magic. And this gets magnified in ways that no one could have predicted when gaff decks are sold on national television. In 1969, magician Marshall Brodeen took a financial risk and bought some broadcast time to air what was essentially a televised pitch act. The product? A Svengali deck, renamed TV Magic Cards. Are you seated? Of course you are. Marshall Brodeen purportedly sold over 17 million decks of these TV Magic cards as of 2015. Now, granted, this talk is mostly about how we as magicians benefited from playing cards advancements. So it's difficult to appreciate and measure the impact that 17 million gaff decks sold to the public had on the growth of the Magic community. I'm going to venture a guess and say it gave birth to an entire generation. No, several generations of close-up magicians, much as David Blaine did in the 1990s. Now, while we're speaking about growth, let's quickly examine the specialty and custom playing card market. These are not gaff decks. Instead, they're regular, artful cards that appeal to a wide range of playing card aficionados, including magicians, cardists, collectors, and many others. For as long as I can remember, red and blue bicycle cards reigned supreme in card magic. They still do. But in April of 2004, Brad Christian, owner of the online magic shop Illusionist, released the Black Tiger deck, and that would have remarkable effects on both the magic and playing card world. If you aren't aware, Brad took the same exact design as the bicycle rider back that comes in red or blue, except his deck came in black. As a side note, Brad Christian was not the first person to make a custom deck with the United States Playing Card Company. As a matter of fact, he wasn't even the first magician. Cardmen like Ricky Jay and Bill Kalush printed custom decks with the United States Playing Card Company in the 1970s and 1980s. But what sets the Black Tiger deck apart from the rest is that it ignited a specialty and custom card revolution. Brad was among an increasing number of magicians who believed the colors red and blue did not adequately represent them. And that makes sense. My favorite colors aren't Riderback blue or Tally-Ho red, and I'm sure you have your own taste too. Now imagine if your favorite color was black. In a sea of only red and blue choices, wouldn't you have felt seen and validated when the Black Tiger deck released? It seems yes. And purportedly, Brad Christian sold 15,000 Black Tiger decks in under 48 hours. Now, consequently, an entire generation of new magicians was attracted to card magic because of, for lack of a better term, a color-changing deck. Again, it isn't easy to quantify the impact this had on the growth of our community. But like with gaff decks, we recognize custom decks are also a powerful vehicle for attracting newcomers. And that was nearly 2 decades ago. And to say an entire custom playing card industry has sprung forth since then is an understatement. It's now a multi-million-dollar commercial enterprise. And there are even esteemed organizations that bestow Oscar-like awards for categories such as Artist and Deck of the Year. So it's safe to say that today, regardless of your budget or aesthetic sense, there is literally a deck of cards for everyone and everything. Like I said earlier, we are privileged to have an incredible choice of playing cards to satisfy our individual needs. So, what comes next? Well, oddly enough, our past provides us with glimpses into the future. Similar to how United States Playing Card Company acquired its competitors all those years ago, in 2020, Cartamundi, a Belgian-based playing card maker, acquired United States Playing Card Company. In doing so, they bought a factory, proprietary printing methods, iconic brands, and now dominate the global playing card market. You've heard it all before. It's the same old story. But this time, we magicians have a front row seat. The official 2020 Cartamundi press release reveals a few more reasons why they purchased the American playing card manufacturer. Quote, the renewed interest in card magic, the rise of the specialty and custom card segment, and the rapidly evolving cardistry trend offer strong growth potential for the group, end quote. Now, I've said from the beginning that card magicians were not the primary driving force behind previous playing card advancements. Most innovations came from games, gameplay, and improving that experience. But you just heard Cardamundi's press release. They find us rapidly evolving. In all seriousness, I interpret that to mean magicians, especially cardists, are pushing the physical boundaries with cards in ways that defy physics. And as you know, we've been doing this for a long while. But because manufacturers want to keep a closer eye on us now, all of this empirical research provides new insights on breakthroughs that card games never could. You know what that means. With great power comes great responsibility. As cardists and magicians of the 21st century, we have officially become more than beneficiaries of card advancements. We now play a significant role in the centuries-old journey to help improve playing cards. Our job, if we choose to accept it, is to continue pioneering these physical boundaries with cards and vocalizing our results and desires. It's then up to the manufacturers to push their own capabilities to keep up with us so that we all progress. What a great time to love playing cards! Which makes it even harder to move into our final part of our discussion. We've spent this entire time discussing the improvements of playing cards made from paper or plastic. So let's talk about the inevitable. It's easy to stand here and look backward to see how far we've come. However, it's difficult to look forward and predict the future. That means today, we stand at a precipice. Now listen, change is always scary, and no one in this room has to agree with any of what I'm about to say. Yet the more we know, the better equipped we'll become for what might be in store. And for those of you who are paying attention, a few intriguing clues point to a new era of playing cards and card magic. And that makes this the perfect opportunity to acquaint ourselves with what's likely to come. Without sounding all sci-fi-like, our future is the metaverse, an immersive virtual world. It seems we're already comfortable with the basic idea of digital playing cards. I mean, who among us hasn't played solitaire on a phone, a tablet, or a computer? So a digital deck that we can deal, manipulate, and play with isn't that far-fetched. Less than a year ago, United States playing card company Cardamundi sold their first digital playing cards in the form of non-fungible tokens, NFTs. And a move like this indicate that the world's largest playing card manufacturer is looking for ways to make playing cards relevant in this brand new space. As card magicians, we too should get curious and investigate this metaverse. I mean, how does sleight of hand work in an environment like this? Instead of paper cards, will we manipulate digital ones like with controllers? Does this mean my classic pass will finally be invisible? Wait a minute. Am I doomed to spend a virtual lifetime practicing that damn move in the metaverse too? So many questions. Please, don't think I believe paper-based playing cards are vanishing anytime soon. At least not in our lifetimes, I hope not. Personally, there are too many sleights I want to perfect and plots I want to investigate. I am, however, eager to create room for this brand new world and be revitalized by playing cards in entirely new and unique ways. So, to conclude, let me make a simple prediction about our future that I hope you'll agree with. If the past millennium has taught us anything, it's that as playing cards progress, so will card magic. Ideally by now, I trust you enjoy and appreciate your cards even more. If that's the case, my work here is done. My name is Lee Asher, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this aspect of playing cards with you. Thank you.